My son stole his brother's ex and planned a wedding behind our backs, so I made one move that crushed his plans and exposed the truth to everyone. I never thought I'd have to choose between my two sons, until one of them made that choice for me. My name is Margaret Cole, and at 56 I thought I had figured out this whole parenting thing. After losing my husband Richard 5 years ago to cancer, I poured everything I had into raising my two boys, David, 32, and Brandon, 29. As a retired financial advisor, I made sure they'd never want for anything, setting up trust funds that would secure their futures. I believed family loyalty was sacred, unbreakable. I was wrong about one of them. The silence in this house had become suffocating lately, wrapping around me like a heavy blanket during those long weekend afternoons. I found myself setting 3 plates out of habit, then remembering with a pang that our Sunday dinners had dwindled to awkward, infrequent visits. The dining room table, once alive with laughter and animated conversations about work and life, now felt like a monument to better times. David, my 32-year-old architect, had always been my steady rock, methodical, thoughtful, the kind of son who remembered to call when he'd be late, and always helped clear the dishes without being asked. His blueprints and building models scattered around his childhood bedroom upstairs told the story of a boy who'd grown into a man of precision and integrity. Brandon, 3 years younger, was my social butterfly, quick-witted, effortlessly charming, the kind of person who could walk into any room and have everyone laughing within minutes. His marketing career suited him perfectly. He had this natural ability to read people, to know exactly what they wanted to hear. When Richard lost his battle with cancer 5 years ago, I watched my two sons become each other's anchors through the storm of grief. Brandon would show up at David's apartment with takeout and terrible movies, while David helped Brandon navigate the practical aspects of loss, funeral arrangements, insurance paperwork, all the mundane details that followed death. Watching them lean on each other during those dark months filled me with fierce maternal pride. They were best friends, brothers in the truest sense, or so I believed with every fiber of my being. Everything changed when Sarah Mitchell entered our lives. She was David's girlfriend for 3 years, and honestly, I adored her. 27, brilliant, with these expressive brown eyes and a laugh that could light up any room. She'd help me cook dinner, listen to my stories about Richard, and genuinely seemed to love David. I started shopping for engagement rings with him, imagining the grandchildren they'd give me. Then, without warning, Sarah announced she was leaving for graduate school in London. The breakup devastated David. I watched my strong, composed son crumble into someone I barely recognized. Brandon stepped up during those dark months, or at least that's what I believed. He'd take David out for drinks, listen to him ramble about Sarah for hours, and constantly reassure me that time would heal everything. "Mom, David's going to be fine," he'd say, squeezing my shoulder. "He just needs his family right now." I was so grateful to have such a caring younger son. That's when the peculiar shifts in Brandon's behavior began creeping into our daily routines, subtle at first but increasingly impossible to ignore. His phone would ring at odd hours, late evenings, early Saturday mornings, and instead of answering casually like he always had, he'd excuse himself with an apologetic smile and disappear into the hallway or step outside onto the porch. I'd catch glimpses of him through the window, pacing back and forth with an intensity I'd never seen before, his free hand gesturing animatedly as he spoke in hushed, urgent tones. When he'd return, his cheeks would be flushed and he'd seem distracted, almost guilty. My casual maternal inquiries about his romantic life, which used to prompt playful eye rolls and good-natured complaints about my matchmaking attempts, suddenly became minefields he'd navigate with surprising dexterity. "Work's been absolutely crazy, Mom," he'd deflect, launching into elaborate stories about demanding clients and impossible deadlines that somehow never quite added up when I thought about them later. The most jarring change was his sudden abandonment of our sacred Sunday tradition. Brandon, who had religiously attended family dinners since childhood, who used to text me Friday nights asking what I was planning to cook, began fabricating increasingly elaborate excuses. Business conferences in cities I'd never heard him mention, client emergencies that conveniently lasted entire weekends, work retreats that seemed to multiply exponentially. For someone who had built his entire social calendar around family time, whose idea of rebellion had once been showing up 10 minutes late, this dramatic personality shift felt like watching a stranger wearing my son's face. The first real red flag came on a Tuesday evening in March. I'd stopped by Brandon's apartment to drop off some leftover lasagna when I heard voices coming from his living room. Through the slightly open door, I caught a glimpse of his laptop screen showing a video call. The voice I heard made my blood run cold. It was Sarah. She was laughing at something Brandon had said, and there was an intimacy in their conversation that made my stomach drop. When Brandon noticed me, he quickly closed the laptop and claimed Sarah had just called for advice about her studies. She's struggling with her thesis and remembered I took similar courses in college, he explained, avoiding eye contact. David doesn't need to know she reached out. It might upset him. At the time, his explanation seemed reasonable, even thoughtful. I should have trusted my instincts. Over the following weeks, I became a detective in my own family. Brandon's business trips coincided perfectly with weekends when David was working late or visiting friends. His social media, usually filled with photos and updates, became suspiciously quiet. When I'd mention Sarah's name around David, I'd catch Brandon shooting me warning looks across the room. The pieces were forming a picture I desperately didn't want to see. The truth exploded on a warm Saturday in April. Brandon had invited me to lunch, claiming he had important news to share. We sat at his favorite restaurant, the one where he used to bring dates he wanted to impress. His hands were shaking as he reached across the table and took mine. "Mom, I'm engaged," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. My heart stopped. Then it started racing. "Engaged? To whom? You haven't mentioned anyone special." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Brandon's face went pale, and for a moment I saw the little boy who used to hide broken toys rather than admit he'd been careless with them. "Sarah," he whispered. "I'm engaged to Sarah Mitchell." The restaurant noise faded to nothing. I felt like I was underwater, drowning in disbelief. "Sarah? David's Sarah? The Sarah who broke his heart 6 months ago? Mom, please understand." "Understand what exactly?" My voice was rising, and other diners were starting to stare. "That you've been sneaking around with your brother's ex-girlfriend? That you've been lying to me for months while David's been suffering?" Brandon's jaw tightened, and I saw a hardness in his eyes I'd never noticed before. "Sarah chose me, Mom. She realized David wasn't right for her. We fell in love. Real love. The kind that can't be stopped by family obligations or guilt." "Family obligations?" The words tasted bitter. "Is that what loyalty means to you? An obligation?" "I don't expect you to understand immediately," Brandon said, pulling out his phone to show me photos of them together. Kissing on London bridges, holding hands in cozy cafes, looking at engagement rings. "But Sarah and I are getting married in 3 months. We've already booked the venue." I stared at the photos, seeing my son's betrayal documented in high resolution. "Does David know?" "We'll tell him after the wedding. It'll be easier that way." "After the wedding?" I could hardly breathe. "You're planning to marry your brother's ex-girlfriend in secret?" "Not secret. Private. There's a difference." Brandon leaned forward, his marketing executive charm kicked into high gear. "Look, Mom, we want you there. You're important to us. But we need you to keep this between us until after the ceremony. David's finally starting to move on, and we don't want to set back his progress." Something cold and sharp crystallized in my chest. "Are you asking me to lie to my other son?" "I'm asking you to protect him. Just until he's stronger." I left that restaurant feeling like I'd been physically assaulted. The drive home was a blur of tears and rage. How had I raised a son capable of such calculated betrayal? How had I missed the signs that Brandon possessed this capacity for deception? That evening, I sat in Richard's old chair, holding his photo and wishing desperately that he were there to help me navigate this nightmare. David called around 8, wanting to chat about a new project at work. His voice sounded lighter than it had in months, and he mentioned maybe asking out a colleague he'd been talking to. My son was healing, and Brandon wanted to tear those wounds wide open. I made a decision that night. If Brandon wanted to play family politics, he'd learn that I'd been managing people and money for 30 years. I knew exactly where his power came from, and I controlled every cent of it. The next morning, I called my attorney. "James, I need to discuss the trust fund arrangements for my sons. Specifically, I want to know about my rights to modify or revoke access. Margaret, you maintained full discretionary control when you established these trusts. Is there a problem?" "There might be. Can you send me all the documentation? I want to review Brandon's fund thoroughly." While waiting for the paperwork, I did something I'd never thought I'd do. I investigated my own son. I called Sarah's mother, Linda, whom I'd stayed in touch with after the breakup. Our conversation revealed that Sarah had been seeing someone new for several months, but had been secretive about his identity. Linda mentioned Sarah seemed stressed about family dynamics and had been asking strange questions about handling disapproving relatives. I also reached out to David's best friend Mike, who unknowingly provided the final pieces of the puzzle. You know, Mrs. Cole, the weirdest thing happened last month. I saw Brandon at that upscale bar downtown, and he was with some woman who looked exactly like Sarah from behind. But when I went to say hi, they'd disappeared, probably just someone who looked similar. The trust fund documents arrived on a Wednesday. Brandon's fund contained over $200,000, money I'd saved by living modestly and investing wisely after Richard's death. The paperwork showed Brandon had been counting on a $50,000 withdrawal to cover wedding expenses. His budget spreadsheet, which he'd carelessly left open on his laptop during one of my visits, detailed every expense down to the centerpieces. I was holding all the cards, and Brandon had no idea. The confrontation came the following Sunday. Brandon had agreed to attend family dinner, probably to maintain his facade of normalcy. David was there too, looking healthier and more hopeful than he had since the breakup. We were halfway through dessert when Brandon cleared his throat. I have something to tell you both, he began, and I watched David's face light up with curiosity and affection for his younger brother. I'm getting married, in 6 weeks. David nearly choked on his pie. Married? To who? When did you even start dating someone seriously? The moment stretched like a taut wire. Brandon looked at me, his eyes pleading for some kind of support or understanding. I gave him nothing. Her name is Sarah, Brandon said quietly. David laughed, not understanding. Sarah? That's funny, same name as my ex. What's her last name? Mitchell. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my eldest son's face cycle through confusion, recognition, and then pure devastation. David's fork clattered to his plate. Sarah Mitchell? My Sarah? The Sarah who said she needed space to find herself, the Sarah who couldn't handle commitment? She's not your Sarah anymore, David. She chose me. David stood up so quickly his chair fell backward. Chose you? When? How long has this been going on? 6 months, Brandon admitted, and I saw him straighten his shoulders like he was preparing for battle. We kept it quiet because we knew it would be difficult for you to understand. Difficult to understand? David's voice cracked. My brother stealing my girlfriend is difficult to understand? Nobody stole anybody, Brandon shot back. Sarah was free to make her own choices. She chose me because what we have is real. What you two had was comfortable, safe, but not passionate. I watched David crumble again, all his healing progress evaporating in seconds. This was my moment. Brandon, I said quietly, I assume you'll want David at your wedding. Brandon's confidence faltered. Well, actually, Mom, we've decided to keep it small, very intimate, just Sarah's immediate family and a few close friends. So David's not invited to his brother's wedding? It's not that he's not invited, Brandon said, his marketing spin failing him. It's just that his presence might make things awkward. Sarah's still sensitive about their past, and we want our day to be perfect. What about me? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Brandon looked at the table, at the ceiling, anywhere but at me. Mom, I love you, but having you there might be complicated. David would expect you to tell him about the wedding, and we're not ready for that conversation yet. So let me understand this correctly, I said, my voice deadly calm. You're marrying your brother's ex-girlfriend. You're not inviting your brother, and you're not inviting your mother because we might complicate your perfect day? When you put it like that, it sounds exactly like what it is, I interrupted. A betrayal. Of your brother, of me, of everything this family stands for. David had been silent through this exchange, but now he spoke up, his voice hollow. Brandon, how could you do this to me? I told you everything. I told you how much I loved her, how losing her nearly destroyed me. You held me while I cried over her. And I genuinely felt bad for you, Brandon replied. But I can't control who I fall in love with. Sarah and I have something special. Something real. I'm sorry it hurts you, but I'm not sorry for being happy. You're not sorry? David's voice was rising again. You're not sorry for lying to me for 6 months? You're not sorry for going behind my back? You're not sorry for stealing the woman I wanted to marry? I didn't steal anything. Brandon slammed his hand on the table. Sarah came to me. She realized you two weren't right for each other, and she reached out to me for advice. Things developed naturally from there. Naturally? I finally stood up and both my sons looked at me with something approaching fear. There's nothing natural about seducing your brother's heartbroken ex-girlfriend. There's nothing natural about lying to your family for months. And there's nothing natural about excluding your own mother and brother from your wedding, Mom, please. No, Brandon. You made your choice. You chose Sarah over David. You chose secrecy over honesty. You chose your happiness over your family's well-being. And now I'm making a choice too. I pulled out the trust fund documents I'd been carrying in my purse. You remember this fund, don't you? The one you've been counting on for your dream wedding? Brandon's face went white. Mom, what are you doing? I'm revoking your access to the trust fund effective immediately. Since your mother and brother aren't welcome at your wedding, my money isn't welcome either. You can't do that. Brandon jumped up, panic replacing his earlier arrogance. Actually, I retained full discretionary control when I established these funds. The money I saved by eating ramen noodles and skipping vacations after your father died? The money I invested carefully so you boys would have security? That money comes with the expectation of basic human decency. David was staring at me in shock. Mom, you don't have to. Yes, I do, I said firmly. Brandon has made it clear that family means nothing to him. Well, family money means nothing to him now either. Brandon was frantically calculating in his head, and I could see the exact moment he realized the magnitude of his financial catastrophe. Mom, please, I can't cancel everything now. I'll lose all the deposits. Sarah will be devastated. Then you should have thought of that before you decided to devastate your brother. This is insane. Brandon's composed mask finally slipped completely. You're destroying my wedding over family drama? I'm not destroying anything, I replied. You destroyed it the moment you chose betrayal over loyalty. I'm simply choosing not to fund that betrayal. Brandon looked desperately at David. David, talk to her. Tell her this is crazy. David stood up slowly, looking at his younger brother with an expression I'd never seen before. Complete disgust mixed with profound sadness. You know what's crazy, Brandon? I actually defended you. When Sarah first left, I wondered if maybe she'd been interested in someone else. But I told myself my brother would never do that to me. I trusted you with my pain, and you used it against me. I never used anything against you. You knew exactly how much losing her hurt me, and you pursued her anyway. You knew I was starting to heal, and you planned to blow up my world all over again. And you know what the worst part is? You don't even seem to understand why this is wrong. Brandon's phone started buzzing. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. I have to take this, he said, stepping into the hallway. David and I could hear muffled arguing, Sarah's voice rising in panic, Brandon trying to explain something about temporary setbacks and family complications. When he returned, his face was ashen. Sarah's threatening to call off the engagement, he admitted quietly. She says if I can't manage my family relationships or our finances, maybe we're not ready for marriage. Maybe she's right, David said coldly. David, please. I know you hate me right now, but Sarah and I really do love each other. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive me? Forgive you? David's laugh was bitter. For lying to me? For stealing my girlfriend? For planning to ambush me with your wedding announcement after the fact? For treating Mom like she's some kind of embarrassment to be hidden away? I never said Mom was an embarrassment. You said our presence would complicate your perfect day. What else could that possibly mean? Brandon had no answer for that. He looked around the dining room, at the family photos on the walls, at the table where we'd shared thousands of meals together. This is all getting blown out of proportion. We're family. We should be able to work through this. We were family, I said quietly. But you decided Sarah was more important than David. You decided your happiness was more important than everyone else's feelings. You decided your wedding was more important than your family relationships. Those were your choices, Brandon. These are the consequences. The next few weeks were chaos. Brandon tried everything: tears, anger, bargaining, bringing Sarah to grovel at my doorstep. Sarah herself seemed genuinely shocked by the depth of the family rift her decisions had caused. During one uncomfortable afternoon visit, she admitted she'd had no idea how devastated David had been after their breakup. Brandon told me David was fine, she said, sitting in my living room looking miserable. He said David had moved on and was seeing other people. David didn't date anyone for months after you left, I told her. He could barely function at work. I was genuinely worried about his mental health. Sarah's face crumpled. I thought I was just ancient history to him. Brandon made it seem like their relationship was more casual than serious. Brandon told you what he needed to tell you to make himself feel better about what he was doing. The wedding was a disaster. Without the trust fund money, Brandon had to cancel the expensive venue, the photographer he'd bragged about, and most of the catering. They ended up having a small ceremony at a local community center with grocery store flowers and a cash bar. Most of the family declined to attend, not wanting to take sides but clearly uncomfortable with the circumstances. David didn't go, obviously. Neither did I. Instead, we spent that Saturday afternoon having lunch and talking, really talking, for the first time in months. David told me he was actually relieved that Sarah's true character had been revealed before they'd gotten more serious. I dodged a bullet, didn't I, Mom? He said, managing a real smile. If she could do this to me, what would she have done if we'd gotten married and hit a rough patch? You dodged several bullets, I agreed. And you learned something important about your brother, too. Brandon's marriage lasted 8 months. The financial stress, combined with the family drama and Sarah's growing realization of what kind of man she'd actually married, proved too much. Sarah filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and emotional manipulation. She moved back to London, and last I heard she'd met someone new. Someone who apparently didn't have a history of betraying family members. David, meanwhile, thrived. Without the drama and emotional chaos Brandon had brought to his life, he started dating again, and eventually met Jennifer, a wonderful woman who appreciated his loyalty and integrity. Their relationship was built on honesty and mutual respect, everything his relationship with Sarah had lacked. Brandon tried to reconcile with the family after his divorce, showing up at family gatherings and acting like nothing had happened. But trust, once shattered, isn't easily repaired. David was civil but distant. I was polite but firm in my boundaries. Brandon had revealed who he truly was during that crisis, and we couldn't unsee it. The final confrontation came at Christmas dinner 2 years later. Brandon, apparently frustrated by the ongoing coldness, finally exploded. "How long are you going to punish me?" he demanded. "I made a mistake, I'm sorry. Can't we move past this? A mistake?" David set down his fork. "You call 6 months of calculated deception a mistake? People fall in love, David, it happens. I can't change the past." "You're right," I said quietly. "You can't change the past. But you could acknowledge what you actually did. You could show genuine remorse instead of making excuses. You could understand why your actions had consequences." "I've apologized 100 times. "No," David said. "You've explained yourself 100 times. You've justified your choices 100 times. You've minimized the impact of your decisions 100 times. But you've never once acknowledged the full scope of what you did to this family." Brandon looked around the table at his family. At David, who barely looked at him anymore. At me, who no longer trusted him. At Jennifer, who, heard the whole story and clearly didn't respect him. At his cousins and aunts and uncles, who all knew what had happened and had drawn their own conclusions. "Fine," he said, standing up. "If this family can't forgive, then maybe I don't need this family." "Maybe you don't," I replied sadly. "But the door is always open if you ever decide you want to take responsibility for your choices instead of just defending them." Brandon left that night and didn't come back. He moved to another city, got a new job, and started over. We hear about him occasionally through mutual friends. He's dating someone new, seems to be doing well professionally, apparently learned to keep his romantic and family lives separate. David got married last spring to Jennifer, and their wedding was everything a family celebration should be, full of joy, love, and people who genuinely cared about each other. As I watched David dance with his bride, I felt a deep sense of peace. My son had found someone who valued the same things he did: loyalty, honesty, and the sacred bonds of family. Do I miss Brandon? Of course I do. He's my son, and I'll always love him. But I don't miss the person he chose to become during that crisis. I don't miss the lies, the manipulation, or the casual cruelty he showed toward his brother's feelings. I don't miss wondering what he might be hiding or whom he might betray next. As I've gotten older, I've learned that love isn't just about acceptance and forgiveness. Sometimes love means setting boundaries. Sometimes love means refusing to enable destructive behavior. Sometimes love means letting people face the consequences of their choices, even when those people are your own children. I kept David's trust fund intact. and he used part of it for his wedding and the rest for a down payment on a house. Jennifer jokes that she married into the most loyal family she's ever met, because David learned from watching me that family loyalty isn't optional. It's the foundation everything else is built on. Brandon's trust fund remains frozen, not out of spite, but because trust funds are meant to support people who understand the value of trust. Maybe someday he'll understand what he lost and why. Maybe someday he'll be capable of the kind of genuine accountability that could begin to repair our relationship. But I'm not holding my breath. I've learned that you can't force someone to develop a conscience they never had in the first place. I sleep well at night knowing I raised one son who understands that love means putting family first, even when it's difficult. As for the other son, well, he's living with the consequences of believing that his happiness was more important than everyone else's feelings. The last lesson Richard taught me before he died was that integrity isn't about being perfect. It's about making the hard choices when they matter most. I chose David over Brandon, not because I loved one more than the other, but because one of them understood what family means and the other had forgotten. Some people might say I was too harsh, that blood should be thicker than water, that family should forgive anything. But I've learned that family isn't just about blood, it's about honor, loyalty, and protecting the people who can't protect themselves. David couldn't protect himself from Brandon's betrayal, but I could protect him from funding it. In the end, the greatest gift I gave my sons wasn't money. It was showing them that actions have consequences, that family loyalty matters, and that some lines, once crossed, change everything forever. I don't regret my choice. I never will.